It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Take Command podcast. That is Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, and today we preview the Commanders game against the Carolina Panthers. 4:05 this weekend on CBS. Logan, that means a late night for us, but we will do the Take Command postgame show afterwards. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to join us live at the Team 980 and at 1067 The Fan on YouTube. Logan, so we're going to get to the Panthers preview here in just a moment. Obviously, big game, bounce back, all that stuff. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other big topics this week for Washington as trades start to flurry around the NFL, and that is, should Washington get involved in the flurry? We've seen Amari Cooper go to Buffalo. We have seen Davante Adams now go to the Jets. And I do think that there's some interesting things to talk about with Washington in terms of the roster, because obviously they just lost John Allen. Javonte Jean-Baptiste goes to IR. They're already, thin at a couple of spots where maybe there are some guys that become available. And I think there's some implications for their salary cap that make them a team. One, they've got a ton of space. Two, there's no one really coming up that they're going to need to pay that they aren't paying already. So they've got the room. Then it becomes a draft capital question. So that's kind of the baseline of where we stand. If you're sitting in Adam Peters' office these days, what kind of things are you looking to explore, and what hard lines are you drawing in the sand?
Yeah, so I think for me, just looking at what Adam's done, since he's got here, and look at what Dan's done, to me, it's not so much about the personnel or winning now necessarily. It's about making sure that this is the right fit for the organization. And we talked about that with the draft pretty comprehensively. And all the guys, are captains, they're great leaders, they're very dynamic. Look at the guys they signed in free agency, the Bobby Wagners, the Zach Ertz, the Austin Ecklers, we've talked about that ad nauseum. And then I think even another good case study for this is Noah Brown, right? Noah Brown is a guy that has come in and just seamlessly adapted to the culture. He's physical, he's tough, he's competitive. And I think what you look at is that there is a common thread of people on the staff having some relationship with that person prior. And I think that's what you got to think about. It's not necessarily the biggest name. It's does this individual fit with what we're building long term? And so I think people get excited about, Amari Cooper or Davante Adams or something like that. And those are really good football players. And I think Washington would be lucky to have them. However, I do think when you bring in a personality like that, especially with a young quarterback, it kind of upsets the dynamic. And I've been a part of a bunch of teams, and I've talked about, when Deshaun Jackson came here and how that kind of shifted some of the, kind of the leadership roles. It shifted some of the things the team prioritized. And again, not that he was a bad teammate, but we just weren't ready to kind of accommodate his personality. And it affected, guys like Trent and other people on the roster. And so I think that's something that we, the Commanders, the organization has time. Right. I think when I hear fans talk about, we got to make a move right now, we can make a push for the playoffs, all these different things. I'm like, we've done that. We've done that song and dance before. I think it's important to be patient, make sure it's the right person. And then I think the other thing that I just go back to is you look at the best teams in the NFL, they're not built through one-off free agents. They're built through draft and draft perspective. And I think Detroit maybe is the perfect example of this, is they've done a great job of building through the draft. They hit on a lot of picks, so that's a big part of it. And then this last year, they go out and sign Zeitler in free agency, who is a cultural fit for what that organization is and what they want to be in terms of running the football, pass protection, all those different things at right guard. And so I think that's why, for me, I'm not expecting anything major happening now. Obviously, if a person becomes available that fits that criteria that we just laid out, I think go for it, right? Because as you just laid out, there's not a money restriction necessarily, but I think to me, it's I want to make sure, if I'm Adam. And again, I haven't talked to him about this. I don't know for sure, but I'm just going off his past experience here or his past decisions. That fit to me is the thing I'm prioritizing above everything else.
So I'm going to reframe it in a slightly more aggressive, because the reason I say reframe is because I don't think you're going to disagree with anything I'm about to say. Maybe you will. And if so, then that's fine. But I'm going to reframe it through a slightly more aggressive lens. I think that they're always going to do what's best for the team. That's obvious, right? I think what's unsaid there is what's best for the team might have expanded. Like if you're in a 2-4 season and you have an opportunity to acquire a good player who fits for you, that is a little bit of is a fit now, is a fit later, but you're going to have to give up your second round pick to do it. So we're talking a good player. You're probably not doing it. I think now with how Jaden Daniels is playing, you have to consider that. And that's because he is playing like a top 5 quarterback in the league. And if you have one of those guys, like, you have a chance to win. And this team is proven to me consistent enough, good enough, and Jaden has been good enough that it is worth being a little bit more aggressive. Now, that doesn't mean you give up a second round pick for anyone. It still has to be the right fit. It has to be the right kind of guy at the right position. You have to not only have this person be like an expiring contract for now, right? You're not going to give up a second round pick for a win now this year and then that person leaves in free agency. This has to be something that works now and later. You're not mortgaging any of later outside of, hey, maybe we're willing to take on a veteran that costs a little bit more money if he's the right character fit and the right football fit, as opposed to going, nope, we have time, let's do it through the draft and leave some of our powder drier for later. I think because of how Jaden is playing, it changes the equation. Now, you have a couple more weeks to make this decision. If Jaden all of a sudden has a stinker this weekend and next weekend against Chicago, then maybe we're back on the, hey, let's just hold tight before everything at the trade deadline, and maybe even sell a piece or two. And you're willing to be a little more patient. And if you back into winning the division, so be it. But I think with where you're at, the rookie quarterback contract timeline is only so long. And to waste a year because you went into it thinking you were only going to be so good when you're actually way better, and the guy that you drafted that you loved is even better than what you thought he would be right now, I think is a waste of a season. And you know as well as anyone, you played, like, these opportunities in the NFL don't come along very often. Like, these opportunities are fleeting. And so I think that in many ways, the principle hasn't changed. You do what's best for the team. I just would be willing to sacrifice a little bit more in terms of draft capital than I thought I would 4 weeks ago, because I think that can actually be what's best for the team.
Yeah, I think the way you worded that is like, I'm not mortgaging later. I think that is the underlying issue here. As I think you see, like, some of these guys that are being moved, they want contract extensions. They want, they're on 1-year deals. They're older players. Like, those things, I think as much as the talent influx is going to be good for a year, it needs to be in that same window that Jaden's here, or approximately that long. Like, that's kind of what we're looking at.
But this is the beauty of him being a first round pick on a first round quarter. Like, that's a 5-year deal. So you have 4 more years of, like, there is no one you're signing to a 6-year contract. So, like, that's why to me the contract part of it is like, I'm not worried about anything. And I had a commenter make this point on YouTube the other day, like, the silver lining, if you will, of Ron's draft era is none of those guys are getting second contracts. So you have almost no players. You've signed Cosme. There's not anybody else that I think is due a big contract that's currently on the roster. So I think the contract part of it, like, you're pretty much set on if you find a guy that you want to give a big 2-year extension to. Like, your cap is fine.
Sure. No, I'm not saying that. But I think the thing is, and I'd have to go back and look at this, but this is just off my gut. Who gets signed, like, at this point in free agency that ends up being, like, long-term solution? Like usually
Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco would be a heck of an example, correct. Right? Mid-season trade.
I think usually right fit. Usually it's not. Usually the off season is when this kind of stuff happens. And I think also like I just think I look at the composition of the best teams in the NFL, and a lot of it is, the majority of it is through good draft process, and it's supplemented with free agency. And so if there's a guy that you like and the contracts, if the situation's correct, yeah, make the move 100%. But I'm not sure like you need to be, I don't think you need to be going out for like the big, to me, it's about the fit. It's about the team. It's about 3 years from now, right? It's about 3 years from now, because I think it's somewhat foolish to think that there aren't more holes than just one person's going to fill. And I think that's the other thing you got to keep in mind is like, we have to fill these 5 positions, make sure that we're good to even have an opportunity to make a big push for the Super Bowl, right? And I think that's that's kind of what I'm looking at too. And if you're making a decision now that impacts one of those other positions down the road, and again, I'm not saying you can do both. I'm just like, this is the devil's advocate to what you just said. It's like you are thinking 3 years of roster construction. And so if I make a decision now that impacts one of those other positions or my ability to sign somebody else later because I wanted to make a playoff push now, I think that's short-sighted. And if they do, that's great. And I think this is the other thing I'm going to say. I trust this organization. I trust Adam Peters. I trust
100%.
Dan Quinn to make the fully informed, fleshed out decision and bring the right person in at the right contract value, someone they see that can help them long term. I totally trust this staff to get that done. But what I'm saying is like these are the reasons why they may not do it. And I think you're laying out reasons why they might do it. And I think they're both true. It's just they got to exist in the same ecosystem.
Right, 100%. And I totally agree. Unlike any other front office that I've covered since I've been here, like whatever Adam's calculations are, I trust that they are correct.
Right.
But to the point of like the next 3 years, okay, well, if we think, let's say even not for this year, but like, okay, next year they're ready to hit the ground running a la what Houston is doing, right? They realize CJ Stroud's better than we thought, sooner than we thought. Like, let's go. And so if you need a wide receiver and a corner and an edge, and you can get, and you know that like we can't get all of them next year to be ready to play next year in the draft, even if we think that long term we could get all three because we're that good at drafting. Like a T. Higgins, now wide receiver is off the board. Like now we can take an edge in the first round next year and go sign a corner in free agency. And now we've hit all three that are ready to play right now.
I'm really glad you brought that up because the other thing that I would just kind of just throw out there is I think you're still trying to figure out through week 6 like who we want to be from a personnel standpoint at certain positions. And that's something that I experienced when I was in San Francisco with Kyle. It's like they went in and they kind of came in and said, oh, this is what we're looking for at these positions, right? They brought in guys in UDFAs and, kind of lower priority free agents. And then as you watch that team, through 18, 19, 20, you saw a big shift in kind of what they wanted to prioritize. So I think that's another thing too, is like, who do we really want to be? I think it's still kind of nebulous at this point. And I think that's why I'm a little bit reluctant for them to go out and sign someone huge because we don't know exactly yet like what we are. And I think that's just part of the process. It's like as the staff comes together, as the quarterback comes together, as all those factors kind of, coalesce and make this organization, make this roster, those things become more clear. But I think we're still kind of figuring it out. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's like if, for example, if we went out this offseason and we're like, man, we really need to prioritize a free agent signing at offensive line, that would have been a mistake because I think we've seen that Kliff's done a good job of insulating that group through play calling. The type of game that he wants to run is going to elevate that group. And so we don't need to put a lot of resources into that position. And so as we go, maybe it's like, oh, we really need obviously you need a pass rush. You need a lockdown corner. Everybody's looking for that.
There's a couple, yeah.
Everybody's looking for that. But I'm just saying, like, what stylistically are we looking for? And I think they're still determining that. And that's where I get a little bit like, maybe we don't need to do that right now. Maybe next year, when we have a better vision of what we want at each position and a better vision understanding of what the defensive scheme actually is and what the offense is looking for, you do it. But I think that's another thing just to consider, right?
No, for sure.
They're still figuring it out.
Yeah, and I think at corner specifically, right? Like, is this a team that wants to play more man or wants to play more zone? Like, 100%. They're trying to figure that out week to week. And by the way, we're going to talk about Carolina in a second. They present some very interesting challenges. They're not a very good football team, but like, the defense is going to feel some stress this week, and how they solve that is going to be interesting. Just real quick to wrap this up, I will say there have actually been a fair number of impactful in-season trades. I just pulled up an article from Fox Sports here. It was written by, I don't know, they don't have a name on it, so probably written by AI. That's great. Fantastic. Thanks for this. There's like some old ones, Mike Haynes back in the day from the Patriots to the Raiders in 1983. The Eric Dickerson trade was midseason. But if we go to more modern times, you have the Seahawks trading for Marshawn Lynch in 2010.
Wow, I didn't realize that was in season.
Yeah, that was pretty obviously impactful. The 49ers trade for Jimmy Garoppolo in 2017.
I remember that. Yeah.
That was midseason. You were there. The Cowboys trading for Amari Cooper from the Raiders in 2018.
Amari Cooper's always midseason. He's on that list. He's on the list 4 times. No, I'm just kidding.
He could be. Steelers trading for Minkah Fitzpatrick in 2019 from the Dolphins. That was a big trade. That was Minkah, a 4th, a 7th for a 1st, a 5th, and a 6th. Wow. Jalen Ramsey to the Rams. That was midseason. Von Miller to the Broncos in 21.
I remember that.
Mid-season.
That was like, that became like much more. Yeah, that's right. Like that. What was that? 20, 21, 22 area, right? Like became much more.
And then you had McCaffrey in 22, and then for the 49ers. And then, I mean, smaller, but obviously tremendously impactful because they've caught the game-winning passes in the last 2 Super Bowls. The Chiefs traded for Kadarius Toney in 22 and Mecole Hardman in 23. So I think the thing that you take out of that is like, you can make really impactful midseason trades.
I'm not saying
they
you
don't
can't,
have, yeah, for sure. But just to emphasize, like it could be tweaking, and a guy like Mecole Hardman makes a big play for you at some key point, or it could be like, hey, we're going for it big, Christian McCaffrey. And I would imagine it's probably like unless Myles Garrett is available. Even for Max Crosby, I'm not trading my first round pick. Myles Garrett is the one player I would trade my first round pick for. Outside of that, I'm not interested in trading my first round pick. But for some other like perfect fit, and this is where you have to rely on your scouts and Adam and knowing the league and knowing these guys and having relationships. If you told me there's a stud defensive end specifically available, and Max Crosby is obviously the name that comes up a lot because the Raiders look to be in potential fire sale mode, then I would consider my second round pick, and I'm not concerned about the money. But I think it's probably much more tweaking along the edges. And the one thing that Dan and Adam have proven, like the kicker situation is the best example of this, they will continue to compete. Yeah. They will continue to tweak and find, and if they're not satisfied with what they got, they will keep bringing guys in and rotate through and try to find solutions. So the Commanders definitely have some holes. I think they have a great opportunity, and how they plug them is going to be interesting to watch over the next 3-4 weeks.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is you got to look at like the free agent landscape going into next year, which we haven't really done, but I guarantee you the staff has. And so it's like, why are we going to make a move if there's other guys that we know, we trust? Like the one that comes to mind, I don't know when Micah Parsons is up, but like that's one where I'm like, that's a legit opportunity, to get a guy that that you trust. And so why am I going to, mortgage resources, financial resources that would potentially impact me getting hypothetically a player like that, in free agency. So I think that's something that, again, like we are looking at the microcosm of now, but I guarantee you they've looked longitudinally at this thing and be like, oh, we've got these other players identified post. So again, I'm not saying they're not going to make a move. I think I trust them to make the right move, which I'm excited about if they do make a move. But I agree with you. It's like there are certain parameters that would fit this, that would make it ideal for this team. But I just think it's so funny we're talking about this now, but we have such limited information compared to what they have. And I think that's just always important to keep in mind. Yeah,
putting the sign on the wall that says do what's best for the team, that's pretty easy. Figuring out what's actually best for the team,
correct,
slightly more complicated. Take command. That's Logan. I'm Craig. So, the Carolina Panthers, Logan, I want to start talking about their offense because I think that this offense could give the Commanders some trouble this weekend as they try to move on without John Allen. I have my reasons. I'm curious, though, before I lead you in any given direction. When you watch this Carolina offense, what do you see that intrigues you, interests you, worries you, or perhaps maybe you're a little more confident and you're like, no, this is fine because XYZ?
Yeah, so I think, obviously I've watched a couple of games, and obviously when Bryce Young was playing, the offense was like non-tenable. Like it was like non-functioning. And then, obviously Andy Dalton comes in and they become much more efficient. And I do think that the offensive structure to me is very interesting. I feel like they're really aware of like who they are. Like they're going to try to run the ball on first down. They're going to try to set up play action shots. They're going to try and use a lot of keeper stuff. It's like kind of like your like color by numbers day one install. Like this is how we protect ourselves. This is how we protect our defense. And they want to be in third and manageable as often as possible, which is what everybody wants to do. But the way they get there is through, we're going to run the ball, we're going to take play action shots, we're going to hit some quick game. And then when we're in third and unmanageable, we're going to get an empty and let Andy Dalton deal. I will say they are pretty efficient running the football. Their offensive line is good. I think when you look at their PFF grades and when you watch them, they're definitely playing on the same page. Robert Hunt is a guy they signed in free agency. Damian Lewis is another guy they signed in free agency. They're big, hulking, 340-pound type guys that can move pretty well. They can run outside zone. They can run mid zone. Not an overly diverse rushing attack. Feels very straightforward. Kind of, again, it makes sense. Kind of very similar to the offense, how it was in Tampa Bay last year. We're going to run a lot of mid zone, outside zone. And then I think you can see, just like general like NFL observation, how gap schemes, traps, whams are coming back into vogue. They don't run a lot of that. I think that's just prerogative. I'm not exactly sure why. But offensive line's good. Chuba Hubbard's running well. I think he's averaging close to 5 yards a carry. So there is some stuff there that makes you nervous. Offensively, they're playmakers. Deontay Johnson, again, is a guy that can win versus man-to-man coverage, is very productive for them. Xavier Legette is the rookie they drafted in the first round, or top of the second. I don't remember exactly where they ended up falling. But he's an explosive guy. Jalen Coker is their slot receiver. And I will say they have a lot of young pieces in the offense that are very athletic. So the other guy is Javonte Sanders, the tight end from Texas last year that everyone
By the way, we just have to pause on Javonte Sanders.
Yeah.
It is badass that a tight end wears 0.
It's 0. It is cool.
All of a sudden you're watching the tape and you're like, who's number 0 running around, getting on the end of the line of scrimmage, getting back there as an H-back, blocking up some stuff. They're running out. He's pretty athletic. Yeah, no, it's cool. Could you have pulled off a 0?
Probably not. No, I mean, I'd be like, why is that offensive lineman wearing 0? It'd be weird. But what I was going to say though is that like 3 of those 4 guys I just mentioned are first year players in the NFL.
Yeah,
and it shows up. So like there was a play, for example, where they're running like kind of a drive concept. So a 5-yard crossing route, a dig by number 1, right? Kind of classic day 1 install stuff. It's 0. It's man-to-man coverage. And for whatever reason, Xavier Legette feels space and just sits down in the middle of the field. And it's tackled on a 3rd and 5 for a 2-yard gain. They have to punt. Like if you have a more experienced receiver, he's going to keep running because he knows it's man, and that's going to be an explosive play. So like each week, each play, they're kind of learning and kind of developing that skill position group. And Andy Dalton is doing a good job of facilitating. So in terms of things that make me nervous, having watched the Commanders play defense over the course of this 6-game stretch, is they're very efficient at running the football. And Andy Dalton can deal if you give him time, which the offensive line will, and if his receivers are on the same page with him, they'll make plays for him. So that's kind of a scary proposition because unlike a guy like Kyler Murray, for example, where there was this very clear way to kind of manage him, it was basically like, hey, if you keep him in the pocket, he doesn't see it very well, and you keep him from the off-schedule throws, you're going to be able to win this football game. Andy Dalton plays the position the way you'd expect him to play it. He hits the open guy. He can anticipate throws. He has turned the football over. He had 4 turnovers in the last 2 games. So the ball is alive. They fumbled the ball 3 times against the Bears also. So there is this kind of wild inefficiency to their offense. They have a lot of penalties, unforced errors, pre-snap stuff. And so it's a young offense. You can tell when you watch it. But they do have weapons. And if they can stay efficient, they are going to hurt you. You know what I mean? And I think that's the thing is like, can you keep them from that level of efficiency that's going to be painful for the defense?
Yeah, so you've hit on the good news and the bad news. The bad news is their offensive line's really good. And some of the problems that Washington had against Baltimore, I think could crop up in this game in terms of no pass rush. Guys are having to cover forever. They've got, as you mentioned, some weapons. And, you know, if they can also run the football, like, man, there's going to be a couple of drives in this game that I think are really frustrating to watch as a Commanders fan because they're gonna drive the ball down the field. The good news is they're not nearly as talented as Baltimore, and eventually they're going to mess it up. Eventually they will commit a penalty. They will drive 14 plays, 80 yards, and throw a pick in the red zone. Like they will do stuff like that on a regular basis. So that's the good news. But that offensive line and the lack of pass rush for the Commanders, I do think presents some challenges in terms of if this game flow stays even for any extensive amount of time. And as we're going to talk about when we get to the Carolina defense, that is also something I think is a huge advantage to Washington. I think that the Commanders could put up points and change the dynamic of this game pretty quickly. But a couple of next-gen stats for you. One, Chuba Hubbard has gained more yards than expected on 55.4% of his carries this season, the highest amongst running backs with a minimum of 50 carries. So he is plus 129 yards over expected in 2024. That's 5th most in the league. But he's doing it on more than half of his carries. So you talk about being in third and manageable. Well, he's your guy. Turn around, hand it to 30, and he'll get you some yardage. 2, we talk about, okay, well, if you can't get pressure, let's dial it up. Let's go man-to-man. That is a bad idea, statistically speaking, against Andy Dalton. Dalton has faced man coverage at the 6th highest rate this season, 35% of snaps, and has been effective against such coverage, 72.5% completion percentage against man. Logan, that is the highest in the NFL. So if you're Joe Witt, how do you manage that reality of, well, if we load the box and try to stop the run and play some man, we don't not necessarily confident we can get pressure. And Dalton's pretty good against man coverage versus, playing some softer coverages. And now you got Chuba Hubbard coming downhill. It is the Baltimore conundrum, just at a junior varsity level versus a master's PhD level that you had versus Baltimore.
Yeah, and I think it's a conundrum that most teams present. Like when you play a well-balanced football team, we've talked about this a ton, like just the general kind of swing back to running the football. I think this is a good representation of that. And so the thing I would say is, I don't know how much man-to-man coverage I would play in this game. I'd probably play a little bit more zone. I'd probably blitz a little bit more. I'd probably, like zone pressures. I'd probably stack the box and just be like, we dare you. Because the other thing I've noticed is that while they have some very athletic pieces, they're not on the same page. And like you said, like they have the ability to go on long drives and make plays and there's explosive plays down the field. There's guys running open, but they screw it up. Like it's a young offense, and it's a young offense because you got a guy who was a backup quarterback. He's now the starter. You've got 2 new offensive linemen. You've got 3 new offensive skill position players, and then Deontay Johnson's in free agency. Like, it's new. So all those little details that you see from Baltimore where it's like, oh, I'm Lamar Jackson, let me check to this too high safety beater. Here's Mark Andrews going to run it exactly the way I want him to right up the seam. That's not in this offense. Like, this is like what you watch, like when you say like this is what is this, week 7 of an offense? This is what it looks like. There's mistakes, there's guys not on the same page, and it feels very kind of clunky. And it's across the board. When you watch offenses like this that are new, that's part of the thing, right? And it's sometimes mitigated by having more experienced skill players, more experienced quarterback. Here, the skill position players are so young and so new, it just shows up all the time. So I do think, like, I'm just like, hey, we're going to play zone. We're going to let you dink and dunk it down the field, and you're going to have a penalty, a procedural penalty, a false start, something like that. You're going to be in 2nd and 15. Then we can heat you up a little bit, and we trust that your skill position players are not nuanced enough in terms of understanding what we're doing to hurt us. And I think that's what I would do if I'm Joe Wood Jr.
Yeah, and it's a matter of, in the meetings this week, like preaching patience. Hey, guys, They're probably going to hit a couple of things. There's going to be some times you're going to cover for 3.5, 4 seconds, and it's going to suck, and I'm sorry about that. But, like, they're going to pick up a false start on the next snap, so just stay with it. Make sure you tackle, like, make sure plays don't wind up in the end zone. You can bend all you want, and they're going to break before you do. And then from the nuance standpoint, it is kind of funny watching, like, after Zay Flowers and Jamar Chase and some of the guys that we've watched the last couple of weeks, watching, like, Xavier Legette run routes, because, like, it looks like he's just kind of, like, weaving. It's like there's a post corner he runs in one of these games. I can't remember which one it is. It might have been actually last week against Atlanta. But it looks like you set up a couple of cones in a row, and, like, as strength coaches, we've definitely sent people on this show, like, S runs.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, it's supposed to be this really sharp up here, bang, like, and instead it's like, it's like a kid putting his arms out doing an airplane, wee. And you're like, I don't think Benjamin St. Juste is going to get quite as turned around against him as you did against Zay Flowers. And that's really relevant because, by the way, it wasn't just Benjamin, as we talked about. Like, Sainristil and Noah and, like, all these dudes got turned around last week because Zay Flowers is precise as a route runner, and he's quick and he's sudden. And Legette's a tremendous athlete. And, by the way, has the coolest voice in the NFL.
Yeah,
but he's not exactly a polished route runner at this point in his career.
Correct. Like, he's a yards after catch guy. Like, you want him to do, this is like, I'm not being mean to Terry here, but you kind of want him on, like, a similar route tree to, like, Terry. And Terry's a much better route runner, but, like, yards after the catch, like, on the slant, on the crosser. Like, we've seen Terry do that, where he catches the ball and he's running for 50 yards or on the seam. Like, those are the kind of routes you want Legette to run because they're not overly nuance. And I'm not saying Terry's not nuanced, but, like, I think there's some similarities. They're like cousins on a tree.
Yeah, it's the junior varsity version of what Terry is at this point.
And he's not quite the contested catch player. And, like, Jalen Coker, I've been impressed with him. He's from Holy Cross, I think is the school he went to coming out. He's 6'3", he's 210, he's a big guy, but he's like, think about the receivers that we've been okay covering. They're the bigger guys that are a little bit slower, that aren't the greatest separators, and they've got 2 guys like that. Now, Deontay Johnson's a good player, but I do feel like St. Juste can match up because I think there's levels to this thing, and I feel like St. Juste can match most guys, but then there's the the 5-10% at the top where he's going to have a hard time. This feels like it's under that threshold for him. And because of the inexperience of the other positions, I feel like you can kind of maybe roll coverage, do some different things, and put them in a better position to be successful. Because again, it's not very clean. It's very formulaic. And who's the offensive coordinator? What's his name? Or the head coach? What's his name?
Dave Canales.
Dave Canales. He's kind of known for this very regimented approach to offense. Like, we're going to have these runs, we're going to have these plays off these runs, and it's all kind of married. There's not a lot of volume, and if you pick up on the formula, I think you can figure it out. And so I think that's what I'd expect is, and I think you said this too, and this is a really great point, and it's something that I think is really significant, is in a bad game flow, they don't scare you at all.
Right.
If the game flow's close, they're very scary because they can kind of stay in their bag. But if you're up by 10 points, everything goes out the window. Everything goes out the window.
Right. If you no longer have to worry about the run, then you just play the soft zone and like, okay, well, beat us now. And they don't have the nuance in the offense to do it. The other thing I'll say too is, coaches get better as the seasons go if they're good coaches. And Joe Witt Jr., I think, is tremendously smart, super competitive, and very open. Obviously, he's learning from Dan, and I think is constantly thinking about how he can be better. And there are some times this year, I think Joe's been, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a young play caller who's figuring some things out. And in a game where the offensive play caller is a little more formulaic, man, when Joe gets in his bag and he is on what the other team is doing, he is excellent. He's gotten that. He's caught that wave a couple times this year, and I think there's a much higher chance in this game as opposed to like against Todd Monken. One, the challenge of the players is not as tough, but two, the challenge I think of the play calling and the sequencing is not quite as tough. So I think it's gonna be a great bounce back game for Joe as well as a play caller because of that formulaic nature. That was something that was interesting previewing Tampa. We had a radio host on the show from down there, and they were like, "We're actually kind of psyched that he's gone because everyone knew exactly what was going to happen every week." And I was like, you mean the guy that got you to the playoffs last year and won a playoff game? They're like, yeah, because that's how predictable they felt like it got by the end of the year.
Yeah, it feels very like that. And again, like not having Lamar to deal with, we talked about this, like the way he was checking plays, and I don't know if he's checking to different plays Lamar is, but like the run can pass stuff, like that's just doesn't appear to be a feature of the offense the same way. So it feels like, again, if our offense does what they're supposed to do, I think Joe Witt will be in his bag and be able to kind of contain what this offense does. They can hurt you, no doubt, but because of the inexperience, because of really the inexperience of the offense, I think you feel better about the matchup this week.
Take command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. And Logan, the good news now, the most fun part, we saved the best for last. I think the Commanders offense can put up some serious points on this Carolina Panthers defense. This morning, watching some tape, I always try to watch the touchdowns given up by a defense. You just sort it out and like how are teams scoring on them. And the answer was every single way imaginable. They've given up 24 touchdowns already in 2024. That's obviously not great. So there's opportunity.
Aren't they on record to be the highest scored against defense in the NFL or something like that? I saw some crazy. Yeah, let's look that up.
I can check that for sure. But they have given up big plays. They have given up stuff in the red zone. They've given up stuff in like the high red, the strike zone area. You can score on them from everywhere. And after a week off of big, giant, explosive plays with Brian Robinson back, kind of shifting Austin Eckler back into his role, and Jaden, I think, ready to come back. And I mean, obviously he was great last week, but lead this offense back into explosive playland. Like, I think this could, if they do what they are capable of, be a big, big day. And I think both run and pass too. Watching like some of the runs they've given up this year and some of the ways that teams have gotten them, I think Kliff is like, hey, Kliff, settle down, pick the right ones, because I know there's a lot of options sitting there in front of you that you probably feel like you can take advantage of this Carolina defense this week.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think one of the things that I get excited for in watching, especially the Atlanta game, is I think that Kliff and this offense are going to be able to run the football quite a bit. And I think when you look at where they've been the most effective, it's when they're efficiently running the football on first and second down. And one of the things I noticed in just watching, I watched a little bit of the Bears game, a little bit of the Atlanta game, but how they distribute over certain splits and certain alignments is stuff that I'm sure Kliff is doing backflips over. Because, like one of the things we've talked about is his ability to create good math in the run game by manipulating splits and spacing. And I just thought, like, man, I know they're probably not going to play us the same way they're playing Chicago, but Chicago lined up in like a slot alignment. So 2 receivers to the offensive left, 2 tight ends in the nub. And the way the Mike was plus to the weak side, so plus to the tight end side, and then the Will linebacker walked out over the receiver. And so if you want to run Wanda there, you're stealing because the center can just run right up to the linebacker. There's a huge crease there. And if that guy walks back into the box, you just throw the bubble. And so in terms of a team that I think about how New York handled it and how New York spaced the field, I'm like, they should be able to get what they want from a distribution standpoint, because I do think this defense is relatively well coached. I think they are in the right positions. I think they communicate relatively well. Again, it's a new defense, new defensive coordinator. The one thing that just explodes off the screen when you're watching it is their front is extremely under-talented at the moment, right? They have all of their kind of big name players. Brown, their kind of all-pro defensive tackle, is on IR. Shaq Thompson is on IR. So like basically they're starting Ashawn Robinson, who's kind of a journeyman run-stopping defensive tackle at right end. LeBryant Ryan, again, who was a practice squad guy last year. Shai Tuttle, who was the backup guy in New Orleans. That's their 3 starting defensive tackles. And so when you watch teams, specifically Atlanta, run the football, it's like you see the nose guard 6 yards down the field, like on his back, more than you probably should. And then when it's time to rush the passer, they just don't have a lot of juice. You know, Jadeveon Clowney didn't play last week. I think you see how the scheme in Baltimore really elevated him and spoke to his skill set, because now they're like, Jadeveon, be our whole pass rush. And it's like, I can't do that all the time. And so
right. Plus, he doesn't have the magic Ravens jersey where one old guy per year gets to have an awesome season again. He unknowingly gave it to Kyle Van Noy. Jadeveon, you should have brought it with you to Carolina.
With you.
That
That's
magic
exactly
Ravens
right.
jersey.
That's exactly right. And so their best pass rusher when Jadeveon's not in is this guy named Charles Harris, who was the 3rd pass rusher when he was in Detroit last year. So I hopefully you see a theme here when we're describing the talent. Like, these are NFL football players, and you know me, I have the utmost respect for all of these guys. But if you were building a roster, these are not guys you want playing lots of minutes. You want them in rotational roles. You want to maximize them in different ways, and they're playing a lot, and it's hurting them up front. And so they do have, like, their linebacker Claude Cherilus is probably their best player on the second level of defense, and he absolutely rips to the football. But one good player in your front does not a good front make. Now, their secondary, on the other hand, is very talented, and they're very athletic, and they run to the football well, and they're good. But it's hard for them to be successful because they're playing a lot of zone coverage. They don't have a good pass rush, and teams can run on them kind of seemingly at will. So that's not good That's not a good formula for for consistent defense, let's just say.
No.
To put it as nicely as possible.
Yeah. I will say, watching some of the touchdown reels, I find, go back to where we started the show, the irony of the name that comes up a lot that people want this team to trade for is J.C. Horn.
Yeah.
And I think J.C. Horn might have given up just as many touchdowns this year as Benjamin St. Juste. Like, yeah. you can get J.C. Horn, and especially when you can run against him forever because there's no pass rush. So it's not even necessarily J.C. Horn's fault. But he has given up some good receivers this year. And he's a guy that likes to get physical. And I don't think Terry McLaurin's too bothered by physical corners. Right. Like, he will power through those guys. So I do think that there's some good matchups on the outside for Washington, even if this front was a little bit better. But I do think at the end of the day, they're probably just going to run the heck out of it. Like, B-Rob's back. McNichols, like, make sure he's ready to go. Like, let's get him some carries. Let's get Eckler some carries. And I think that some of the big explosives that they've gotten this year in the run game have been on some of these game planny, tricked up type of runs where they have, there's the draw that they run where, like, one back goes and then the other one kind of follows them. Like, that's back on the table in your 2-back sets. J.K. Dobbins had, I think it was a 43-yard touchdown for the Chargers out of a super heavy tight end set in the middle of they're running goal line in the middle of the field. Because that's how Jim Harbaugh rolls. But, like, Kliff also rolls that way to an extent. Like, he'll put 2 tight ends on the wing with the one side and feel like we're going to smash you with John Bates and Ben Sinnott. So, like, there are opportunities, I think, from personnel, from formation, from not just like personnel in terms of like, we're going to go 2 tight ends and watch you match it in a way that's not good for you. And then we're just going to beat you. But like, we can beat you anyway because your players just aren't that good, with all due respect to them, because they are overexposed. As you said, like if you had been asked to be Chris Cooley or George Kittle, the teams you had been on would not have been as good. That wasn't your skill set. Those were the minutes that you were going to play. So that is the respect. But like, if you put Logan Paulson in the Logan Paulson bucket,
Correct.
Logan Paulson's good at being Logan Paulson.
I'm good at what I do. And again, these guys are good at what they do, but you don't want them. They're
not being asked to do what they do.
Correct. That's exactly right. So, and again, like I think the secondary is good. I think they got some good players. I like what J.C. Horn does. He's giving up touchdowns, but I think he's playing well. But Mike Jackson's playing well. But they can't do enough to stop you, right? They just don't have enough horses. And so, if Washington comes out, executes the way they've executed since the season began, and Kliff calls the game the way since the season began, they should be able to run an effective offense. Now, I think this is maybe the biggest storyline for me coming in this game, and maybe the most important thing is, like, I think after reviewing this, we understand that Carolina has issues as a team, right? However, can Dan and this staff keep them motivated and keep them excited for this game? Like, that's the thing that I keep coming back to, because they got up for Cincinnati, they got up for Baltimore. This is the thing for me. It's like if they do what they're supposed to do and play the game the way that we've seen them play it, it should be fine. But like that's the funny thing about the NFL is you just had this extremely emotional, physical game, and now you're coming to this one. Like, how many times have you covered a team? How many times have I played for a team where you just fall on your face because you're not ready for an NFL team that is wanting to win, and it's full of professionals? So that to me is like the real story here, is the motivation and the leadership of this team.
Let me ask you from the inside that question though. Like, when you've had those weeks where you're like, man, okay, and you come out of it, you realize you were overconfident. Is it like, man, we're gonna thrash these dudes, we don't take it seriously? Is it an overconfidence? Is it not doing enough prep, thinking that during the week, like, oh, we got this? Like, what is the way in which you've seen teams fall short in this spot? Because I do think for this team, like I think that they take the process seriously, they do the right things, but like it would be like an overconfidence, like we're gonna go smash these guys, and they're not quite as locked in on a game day on the P's and Q's. But I could see other teams maybe being like, we don't need to work as hard this week. We need to recover a little bit after that Baltimore game, and then all of a sudden by Sunday you're not ready yet. I don't think that's the case.
It's an emotional flatness, I guess, if that makes sense, right? It's like you've prepped it, you've checked all the boxes, right? But you got to be impassioned and motivated at the NFL level, because every team is good. Not every team is good, but they're full of professional players, right?
Right.
And so if you don't match their emotional intensity, like, they're gonna roll you, like they will. And like, so you did all your normal stuff, but then you get to game day and you feel like, man, I feel a little sore, and everyone's kind of. It doesn't feel any different, but the first snap, you can tell. It's like, oh, like we're not quite where we need to be, right? It's like, oh, we made a mental mistake. I made that mental mistake. You're just not locked in on the day for whatever reason. And that's to me, it's just like you're just not there emotionally. You're not emotionally in the moment. And again, like that's where I think like Dan does such a good job of kind of motivating teams. The leadership on this team has done a great job. But this is one where you really got to say, hey, like, let's get after these boys and make sure we're emotionally ready. And that's the tough thing about the NFL is every week is a tough game. Like, I've had conversations with guys that have coached in college and coached in the NFL, and then they've said, I can't handle the NFL environment. And you say, like, why? And it's like, there's no layups. Every week is a street fight. And that is too much stress for me to handle. Like, I want to go coach at Alabama where you get 3 easy ones and then you get in your schedule and you're ready to go. Like, this is, and that's why this is tough. That's why the NFL is the NFL and college football is college football, is you have to be ready every single week.
Offensively, like, is there stuff Kliff can do as a play caller to be like, to get them in the right kind of flow early, mindset early, whether that's running, whether that's taking a deep shot, on the first play of the game, like something that kind of jolts the system? Is that a thing you think about, even at the high school level when you're calling plays?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's like that's the first play of the game to me is the most important play at any level, right? Because it's like, I want to kind of set a tone. I want to make sure we're on schedule. I want to make sure we don't go 3 and out our first drive. And so I think when you look at Kliff over the 6 weeks, like he's done a masterful job of that, of just kind of being ready for what they're bringing and putting guys in good spots to be successful. So I'd expect them to come out. And again, like if I'm Kliff, I'm like, let's run the football. Let's have a big chunk play. Let's get B-Rob going early. Maybe it's a zone read. Maybe we don't do zone read because we want Jaden to settle into the decision-making game. Like that'd be the best thing for me is if you get it, run B-Rob, maybe a trick kind of jet sweep, something like that. And then the rhythm's going, little quick completion on like a spot route for Jaden. And then we're rolling. I mean, that's perfect. And then the offense has this inertia and you're ready to go and you've got the first down and everything's kind of clicking the way you want it to click. And I think, as we just talked about, you can do that versus Carolina, right? 100%. It's just about making sure that the offense is like ready to rock and roll and get after it. So
yeah, I'm gonna make a prediction because there's no stakes in this. Pop pass to Terry. That's what
pop pass to Terry. First one.
Terry's a guy that brings juice. Like let's get him going. Let's get an easy one. He's not necessarily the greatest screen catcher. It's not as smooth. You get him a little pop pass, get him on the edge, let him just start running people over. Get the line moving a little bit. You get Jaden technically an easy completion. That's my first play of the game.
I mean, I remember.
If I'm right, I'll look like a genius. If I'm wrong, no one's going to remember this.
I remember Kyle spending a lot of time being like, first play of the game, I want it to be something that, again, keeps us on schedule and gets us in a rhythm. So, like, he used to love, like, 4 outs, like, out by the inside guy, out by the outside guy, because he felt like it was just easy opportunity for the quarterback to settle in the offensive line, get their first pass pro rep in on a quick game, right? No one's really stressed out. So it's a science for sure. And you got to kind of have a really good feel for the team and a really good feel for what they feel comfortable with.
And that science is psychology. Psychology, boys and girls. All right. We will be back on Sunday night live from Northwest Stadium after this one. So make sure you are subscribed at the Team 980. I forget how the game times work. I guess if that game ends at like 7, we'll be on at like 8. That's kind of how that typically goes. Yeah, I know. I'm not super psyched about it. I don't want to get home at 9 o'clock, but it is what it is. I'll be home earlier than Logan because Logan lives very far away from the stadium and I don't live quite as far. But hopefully, honestly, Logan, that it'd be great. It'd be great to blow out because then there's going to be less traffic because people can leave at their leisure. Hey, if you want to leave early fourth quarter because the Commanders are up 30, go right ahead. That's less people in the parking lot at once. But I expect a great crowd. By the way, congrats, of course, to Darryl Green on the jersey retirement. That's going to be really cool this weekend. So very excited to be in the building for that one. In the meantime, we'll finish our preview up on the radio at the Team 980. I'll be on at 4 o'clock the next couple of days because, well, that's when my show is. Logan and crew will have some stuff over on Command Center. So if you want more of Logan, check him out there. And we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.